Welcome to Experts Unleashed, a podcast that aims to uncover how professionals and entrepreneurs transform their experience into income while making a positive impact in the world. I'm your host, Joel Irway, and over the past 4 years, I've helped entrepreneurs develop and launch their expert-based businesses to grow past 6 and 7 figures per year. Now, a professional expert serves their community through paid training, education, or service, and this podcast will show you how to design and execute your plan to become a 6 or 7 figure expert without a big team. So, let's get started. Hey, what's going on, experts? It's Joel Irway here, and welcome to a very, very special episode of Experts Unleashed. Today, you are in for a very, very special treat. I just hopped off the horn with my good friend, Jordan Harbinger. And what we talked about today was something very, very fascinating. Now, I am a huge student of learning the art of interviewing. And so Jordan has run a very, very popular, one of the most downloaded podcasts on all of iTunes with a previous show. And he has since left that show and launched a brand new podcast called The Jordan Harbinger Show, which has skyrocketed to the top of the charts. Now, Jordan is a fantastic interviewer, and so it was great to flip the script and talk about his story. Now, this is a very unique episode because if you follow Jordan, he talked about kind of his past with why he left his previous show, which is a very, very popular podcast. I didn't want to go down that route. I wanted to focus on different parts of his story, why he was kidnapped, other very interesting aspects of his life that have contributed to where he is today. As you guys all know, the purpose of the show is to unlock opportunities, talk about how to unlock opportunities within our space. So you're going to really love this episode. I know you're going to enjoy it. And when you're done, go follow Jordan. He is completely open for feedback, open to connect with him, and his show is absolutely on fire right now. So without further ado, let's jump into today's episode. Hey everybody, it's Joel here, and welcome to another very special episode of Experts Unleashed. Now, guys, today I'm super pumped. We have a very special guest as we get to speak with someone who has rubbed elbows and interviewed some of today's most recognized personalities and celebrities, Jordan Harbinger. Now, Jordan, once referred to as the Larry King of podcasting, is a Wall Street lawyer turned talk show host, social dynamics expert, which we are going to be talking about in just a minute, and entrepreneur. After hosting a top 50 iTunes podcast for over a decade that enjoyed nearly 4 million downloads a month at its zenith, Jordan has embarked on a new adventure, The Jordan Harbinger Show, where he deconstructs the playbooks of the most successful people on earth and shares their strategies, perspectives, and insights with the rest of us. Throughout his career as a host, he's interviewed the likes of Neil deGrasse Tyson, Russell Brand, Shaquille O'Neal, Simon Sinek, Tony Hawk, Larry King, Mike Rowe, Chris Hadfield, Penn Jillette, and many more. As a former Wall Street attorney, Jordan speaks 5 languages and spent several years abroad in Europe and the developing world, including South America, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. He's also worked for various governments and NGOs overseas, traveled through war zones, and he's been kidnapped twice. So I'm very interested into that. But Jordan, man, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, man. You know, it's funny about that intro. You're like, as a Wall Street lawyer, Jordan speaks 5 languages. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Being a lawyer does not automatically mean that you speak 5 languages. In fact, usually it means you speak 1 language and then legally. And everyone's like, what did that guy just say? This is so confusing.
I'm glad you clarified that because I think my listeners were definitely going to be thrown off by it.
Yeah. Like, wow, if you go to law school, you have to speak 5 languages? No, you totally don't.
So Jordan, we talked about this before we hopped on our official interview, but I went fanboy on you. Like as soon as we hopped on our call, I'm like, dude, I got to give you props, right? So
I'm happy to relive that right now. If you want to relive that, I'm cool with that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's do it, man.
Never gets old. You know, people are like, hold on, let me apologize. I'm about to give you a bunch of compliments. Nope. Go right ahead.
So as a show host myself, I love to, for lack of a better word, deconstruct the art of how to give great interviews. And so before we hopped on, I mean, I've listened to a bunch of your podcasts over at the Jordan Harbinger Show, which everyone should go check out because it's fascinating stuff. but I was re-listening to Simon Sinek's episode. And the reason why I was so fascinated is because you are able to dive way deeper below the surface. There were a couple of instances with his episode where actually in the very beginning, you were kind of like questioning not really questioning the whole art of why. You're like, I believed in it once and I didn't really understand why I needed it until more recently. But that led into a really, really fascinating discussion, which ultimately led the conversation to say like why people take their quote unquote why for granted until later in life. And so it was an excellent interview. You also talked about the Goldman's dilemma, which was fascinating, which was like over 50% of Olympic athletes would sacrifice their life to achieve a goal. So those are the nuggets that you don't get in many other interviews. And so I do want to just give you props on being an excellent interviewer because it's a skill that is vastly underrated.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I agree that it's underrated in that I've had a lot of people try to copy, and I'm not saying like, don't try to copy me. Flattery is, what is it? The most sincere form of
imitation is the most sincere form of flattery.
Something like that. The opposite of what I just said. So about how I'm articulate, but having people try to copy the style and things like that really comes down to the fact that I don't have any particular talent as an interviewer, as evidenced by my lack of ability to even get out a cliche that everyone has been able to use successfully for generations. I really just outwork everyone when it comes to prep. I was talking with a lot of journalists recently because I always seek these people out and I'm like, hey, you're really good at this. How much do you prepare and all this? And you find usually that the best interviewers, they're really, really, really well prepared. So when you look at a guy like Howard Stern, which I don't love that show or anything, but he's got a great style. I listen to people that have worked with him and have them helping me and they show me how he prepares. And he sounds like he's just sort of walked into this thing and winging it. And he's got dozens of hours of prep behind him from his team. Journalists like Anderson Cooper, Charlie Rose, they do dozens and dozens of hours. And then even people that say, well, I didn't prepare that much for this interview, or I only had 20 minutes to prepare for this phone interview. When you look at the history of what they're doing, it's like, yeah, you only had 20 minutes to prepare for the phone interview with the Prime Minister of Lebanon, but you were the bureau chief of Reuters in Lebanon for 12 years. So it's not like you had, what's this guy's name? How do you pronounce this? It's like, okay, all right, I haven't read the latest and greatest from this guy, but I've spent 10 years following his career. So they do a bang up job.
Yeah.
And so what I have to do as an interviewer is instead of going, well, it's a podcast, nobody really cares. It's like, no, if I've got somebody coming on the show, I've got to read their book. And if they have two books and the second one is a take after the first one, I got to read both. And then I've got to look at their TED Talk. And then I've got to listen to the interviews they did with other media and make sure that I'm not just redoing what everyone else did and that I do get the good stories that they want. But I also want to make sure that I'm aware of when they're using what's called a sound bite. So that if I see them going down the rabbit hole of autopilot, oh, this is where I talk about how when I was a kid, I stole a bike and I got caught. It's like, I want to be able to nip those in the bud or move them along fast so we don't spend 45 minutes going over exactly what they talked about in every other show. So getting things that other people haven't said, it's people are like, wow, how do you get things that other people never get? It's not because that, sure, I have good rapport with the guest, but mostly because I prepped and they know that they can't go through the BS with me. But a lot of it is not just they liked me, so they admitted all these things they didn't talk about elsewhere. The thing is, their sound bites and all their pre-prepared stuff, I was aware that it was coming. I saw it coming and I just sort of like ninja blocked it and was able to parry that and then something else, right? Yep. And that's a skill, but mostly it's just, if you can look at game tape, AKA read their book and listen to interviews, you know they're going to run whatever play, the sound bites that they're going to run. So you can set up your defense, not that I look at interviewing as an adversarial relationship, but you can sort of do that and be like, okay, he's going to bring up this story. When he does, I want to then skip to the end of that story because there's way too many details. And so instead of a 5-minute long story about how he stole a bike and got caught, I just go, didn't you steal a bike and then you got caught by your mom? And that's just a nightmare scenario for me. My mom would have kicked my butt. Tell me what you learned from that. It's like, skip the whole story, get to the lesson. And you got to be able to do that. So I'm thinking of those things when I do the interviews. Does that make sense?
100%, man. I just did an interview with Elaine Pofelt. I shouldn't say just, this was probably a month ago. And she authored, and she's on one of the previous podcasts too. I wish I could tell you which episode it was. But anyway, you'll see it when you go check it out. But she authored the book, The $1 Million One-Person Business. And we were talking about that. And her background is in journalism. And for me, I come from a non-publicity world. And as we were talking, it was so apparent how detailed and how much research that she did and how important that was. It just revealed this whole other world, because I don't know much about journalists at all. And I didn't really know how their mind operated, but you're 100% right, man. It's all in the research, like it's all in the background, and just getting your facts straight and knowing where to pivot and seeing when they're going to be running a run play up the gut or a Hail Mary pass and being able to defend it. That was an excellent analogy.
Yeah, there's a couple strategies. We don't have to go deep into detail on this, depending on how many of your people listen or have shows, but there's a lot of strategies for getting things out of people. And even interviewers like Joe Rogan are well known for also getting a lot out of people, but that's because he does a 3-hour-long show. So one of the things that a lot of people don't know about the Jordan Harbinger show is that I record 90-minute blocks, but I have a 45, 50-minute long show. The reason is because a lot of the time there's technical glitches, but another strategy that I have, and this happened, I was interviewing this FBI agent, and she just had all of her sound bites and she would not let them go because she was media trained and she was uncomfortable freewheeling it. And she had just a few things she wanted to get across. So since she was kind of, I don't want to say uncooperative, but a little bit less cooperative with the free flow that I would like, I just went, okay, plan B, instead of trying to get bob and weave, I'm going to run out the clock. So I let her get through all of her sound bites. I didn't save much of anything. And then after she was done, I told my producer on the back channel, I go, cool, cut out all of that except for the introductory material and then the one story about the car. And then I started asking questions and she answered all of those questions and we cut out 40, 45 minutes of the sound bites. And then we aired the show and she went, wow, I just listened to it. It was by far the best one. I'm really getting better with practice. And I was like, actually, what you need to do is stop with the rehearsed crap because this is the real show, right? Yeah. I hate looking at interviewing as an adversarial relationship, but sometimes the guest can't do a free-flowing conversation because they're not a performer. And when you get a guest like that, when you get a scientist, you've got to be able to spar with them based on their own research. And if you're just going, tell me something interesting, you're going to be disappointed when they go, shoot, I don't have anything interesting. Or, all my research is fascinating. Let me tell you about zygotes. Wait, hold the hell on. No.
So this is going to be a good transition. Like what we're talking about here is going to be a great transition into, I mean, I'm going to self-label it. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's got to be one of your top skill sets, which is either social networking or social engineering. I can't remember what you called it, but obviously you're a brilliant networker, right? I was listening to John Corcoran's podcast when he interviewed you, and you had mentioned something. The reason why you started your podcast was because you said you love conversations. What do you mean by that? How do you love conversations?
Good question. Okay, fair enough. I'll have the same conversation I would at a party as I would on the show in a way, although there's differences, obviously. When I'm doing a show, every minute of the listener's time has to be earned. Whereas if I'm at a party, I'm a little more selfish with my curiosity, but I still love the art of getting people to teach me something, right? So if I meet a Google search person, I don't know, I'm pulling this out of the air. If I meet someone who works for Google and they're trying to tell me about, oh yeah, I do search over at Google, I want them to teach me something that I can use, or at least some new manner of thinking, even if it's a mindset, you know, like, oh yeah, what we're working on is this. I want them to show me or teach me something. And so I guess I really have a passion for figuring out what people are interested in talking about, getting them to talk about it, and then getting them to talk about it in a way that's not just mindless entertainment or fluff or banter. I would want that person to teach me something that either nobody else knows yet outside of their niche that's really interesting, or a different way of thinking, or something that I can use. So in that way, knowing that I'm going to be better for having had the conversation, it's a lot easier for me to get interested. That's why when people go, oh, I just can't do the small talk that people have at parties, I go, well, good. You shouldn't. Oh, it's so hot out today. Yeah, it's really hot. Who cares? There's a reason you're bored with small talk. And a lot of people go, yeah, I just have this analytical mind and I can't do it. I get that you can't do it. It's also completely fruitless. But if you can do like 1 second of it and you go, yeah, it's so hot outside. And then everyone goes, yeah, it is hot outside. And you go, all right, so I know that you work in animal conservation. What is this whole global warming thing, speaking of hot weather, doing for your career? Oh, well, actually, it's changed the migration patterns of a lot of animals. Oh, well, tell us about that. Now you're done with the small talk. You know, the reason people hate small talk is because it's so hot outside. Yeah, it sure is. Yeah, I've been sweating a lot. Yeah, me too. Oh, I got to wear a suit to work. oh man, yeah, you better take Uber because you ride your bike. That's so dumb and boring. I get why people hate that. So for me, I don't have a passion for that kind of conversation, and nobody, frankly, does or should. But if you can really make it useful, then I don't understand how you can not be interested in it. So whenever somebody's like, oh, I don't like talking to people, I get that either they're uncomfortable with it or they just don't have enough skill to make it utilitarian, or usually a mixture of both.
Clearly, you're a brilliant networker, right? When you rattled through all the interviews that you've done in the past, those are the biggest names known today. So you teach networking, right?
Yes.
What is, I don't want to say the secret. I hate the secret. I hate the secret behind networking. But can you take me through an example of in your mind, when you made one of the biggest connections you ever had? Maybe it was your first big interview, and was networking involved with that? I know I'm kind of reaching here, but I'm trying to grab at how you've been able to relate networking to constantly just get these big names like Simon and Mike Rowe and everyone that we listed earlier, Shaquille O'Neal.
Sure. Look, I don't want to front entirely. Some people you get because they have a book coming out and they're like, oh, my assistant will do the interview. And I'm like, no, I don't want your assistant. I have questions for you only. And they're like, well, I won't do it. And I'm like, cool, I'm not going to promote your book. Sometimes you do that. Okay. You turn the screw. But on the other hand, most of the networking that I get done or that I do, or whenever I get a big guest like a Shaquille O'Neal, is I go, all right. And I'm looking for opportunity. It wasn't like I'm such a huge Shaq fan. I need to get Shaq. How do I get Shaq? It was like, all right, I joined this network, Podcast One. The owner is friends with Shaquille O'Neal. I know that because he has courtside seats. I knew that he had courtside seats because it's called Courtside Entertainment, and I thought that was a weird name for a company. And then I walked into his office, and there's a picture of him with President Clinton and all these other people, Kobe and Shaq. And then Shaq came out with a podcast, and I went, when can I get Shaq? And he goes, oh, we'll figure that out sometime. I don't know. He's pretty hard to get. And then for 2 straight years, I said, give me a goal to hit, and when I hit it, you'll help me book Shaq. And he was like, it's really hard to get. It's a really big favor. It's really hard to get. It's a really big favor. And so I kept helping him recruit new members for the network. I kept helping this, Norm Pattis is his name, kept helping him make money through advertising. I kept bringing him advertisers. I kept bringing him advertising properties. I kept connecting him with other people in my network. I wasn't doing a lot of this myself. I was connecting with other people in my network. And eventually he goes, man, this is really helpful. And every time he would say something like that, I'd say, you don't have to thank me. Just hook me up with Shaq. And he goes, I'll do it eventually. It'll happen. I promise it's going to happen. And I just followed up in a way that wasn't annoying. And every time I brought some value, I didn't say, I'm doing this in exchange for Shaq. I just kept doing the value add thing. And eventually he was like, hey, you know what? Shaq's coming into town. He's going to be in studio. Do you want to do the interview? I'm only hooking him up with you. Don't tell anyone. They'll find out when he gets here that he's here, but he's going to do your show and that's it. And I went, yes, thank you. And he goes, good. Here's another contract for you to sign. That's an extension of the one you already have. And I went, I get it. I feel you. Fine. Sign it. We're doing it. And it wasn't quid pro quo. I'm sort of saying it in a way that sort of sounds like it, but temporally, these things are all spread out over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying if you hook me up with this, I will do this for you. It's just, I'm always helping other people without the expectation of anything in return. I dig the well before I'm thirsty, which means I prepare and create relationships before I ever need them, even if I might never need them. And I give generously in all cases, even if I don't think anybody can ever help me. So I'm always making those introductions the same as I would if somebody said, I'll give you Shaq, even if you do this. I would make those same introductions to anybody else who needed them for any reason. And that's the reason that I end up with the opportunities that I have, is because I'm willing to help and give generously all the time, instead of just trying to close. So it's ABG, always be generous, instead of ABC, always be closing, right? I'm always willing to be generous with that because you never know where those opportunities lie. And with this sort of fell into my lap. So it was a matter of filtering for that opportunity, pursuing it in a way that was tenacious but not annoying, and being valuable enough that it actually made sense for that to happen. So people go, great, you're on a network and Shaq was on that network. So what? I can never do that. Fine, let me pick somebody else. How about Mike Rowe? You mentioned Mike Rowe.
Yep.
So I said, how does one get in touch with Mike Rowe? Well, you sure as heck don't tweet at the guy or try to hit him up on Instagram. He's busy, right? You never go directly. So what a lot of people do is they go, oh, I need an introduction to Mike Rowe. I want to know him so that I can make this thing happen. Okay, that might work, but guess what? If they're anything like me, and a lot of people are, especially hard to reach people that are busy, which includes like every celebrity, you reaching out to them is impossibly difficult to cut through the noise. And you have to get around all these gatekeepers. And when you finally end up in a back stairwell during a fire drill at the opera and Mike Rowe's standing right next to you, he goes, sure, I'd love to do your show. Here's my card. Email this. My assistant will reply. And you end up exactly where you would have been if you got the introduction to Mike Rowe's assistant instead of to him directly. And people don't think about this stuff, right? Like, you're not trying to become Will Smith's best friend.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to happen. And even if it did, he'd say, cool, call my assistant. What you're trying to do is get in touch and influence the people that can influence them, right? Like, if you want to get in touch with me and you're having trouble, you need to not try to get in touch with, and I'm easy to reach, so I'm a crap example of this, but don't try to continually bang down my door. Find out who my assistant is. It's my wife. Get in touch with my wife. Get her to like you. I will probably end up doing whatever you want because she's going to be like, I made you an appointment with Joel Irway and he's really nice. And I'm like, okay, great, whatever. But if you're bugging me or somebody else directly for 3 years, there's a good chance it's just never going to happen because I'm going to be like, sure, remind me in 6 months and I'm going to forget about it. So the same thing goes with any high profile personality. You have to find the people that influence them. They are not usually even in control of their own schedule because they don't want to be. Yep. They don't want to be. You have to go to the person who's a gatekeeper. But here's the thing. That influencer, their job is to say no to most things. So you're not going, hi, Mike Rowe's assistant. I want to interview Mike Rowe because they're going, great, join the club. I'm going to drag this to the folder of people that are probably never going to have that happen. And it's always going to go there and I'm never going to see you again. What you want to do is get in touch with that person and say, look, I'm really interested in interviewing Mike Rowe. I know that he's so busy. Is there somebody else that I could interview that's a part of your organization that you think would be really good on my show? I'm interested in helping out with the charity that you guys run. And then his assistant will likely say, sure, we have a PR publicist that I think would be a really good person for you to talk to. And then as your value to them grows, they go, you know what you should do? You should have Mike on your show because he's got a new show coming out and he's also got that charity and he'd probably love to talk to you. That's how those things happen. Not, hi, can I talk to Mike? 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 Like, that's just irritating. And then that's how you get blocked.
Yep.
Right. You have to bring value to them. It's not just relentless follow-up.
Awesome, man. I hope you write a book one day called Always Be Generous, ABG Networking. I think it's a fantastic name.
Yeah, that's actually not bad. And I'm going to write it down right now.
There you go. We are also recording, so it might be if you ever need it back again.
Got it.
That was an excellent example. Never go directly because you do become that annoying person. Like, hey, can I jump in? I mean, case in point, I actually personally know somebody who I like, have met in person, and she wanted to come in and do a training to my group on Experts Unleashed. And I said, sure, let's do it. And I full intention wanted to, but then she started nagging me and like it was in the calendar. And then we had the call to discuss it. She was 8 minutes late. I bailed. And then she kept nagging me again. I said, we're done. Like,
yeah, it sucks.
So anyway, it's super, super valuable. I mean, it took over 2 years to get Shaq and you built the well. You dug the well before you were thirsty. Fantastic, man. Love that stuff. So you also have a networking course. Obviously, you teach this. You're an expert at it. So you have a networking course that people can go through for free, right? Or part of it for free.
I do. Yes. I have advancedhumandynamics.com/level1. It's a networking class. That's all this stuff I wish I'd known like 15 plus years ago. And it's got a lot of drills about reaching out to people, automating relationships. And, well, I should say automating relationship maintenance. You can't automate a relationship, but using things like Facebook, LinkedIn, calendars, stuff that you all have, but that nobody uses properly. And it creates a lot of the mindsets in you. So while you're standing in line for coffee at Starbucks, like I got right here, that you can use that time to actually maintain your network. Because a lot of people procrastinate. They say, well, why should I reach out to people now? I've got all this other stuff I got to do. How am I possibly going to spend another hour per day doing this? Or how am I going to reach out to people doing that? I've got all this social media stuff I got to do. Why am I going to figure this networking thing out? It's really surprisingly easy to create these relationships and maintain them over time. And so that's the drills that I've got there at advancedhumandynamics.com/level1 is where I keep the secret goods. And it's free because I want people to go there and go, oh my gosh, this is the magical stuff.
Jordan's the man.
Yeah, Jordan's the man. The Jordan Harbinger show must be amazing because this networking stuff is amazing. and then it makes the world a better place. Because frankly, if everyone used the ABG generosity model, everyone was helping each other out, we would all be so much further ahead, and we wouldn't have this sort of one-sided what's in it for me type of stuff going on as much anymore, because there would just be so much value that people would instantly realize they have and that they can bring, that people wouldn't be worrying about trying to get ahead or help. Oh, I don't want to help my competitor. Like that stuff all melts away.
Yep. Love it, man. And anyone who joins that course, you get instant access to Shaquille O'Neal. You forgot to mention that as a bonus.
That's right. You get his cell phone number and an autographed picture.
Just kidding. All right, man. So I want to rewind this. What I love to focus on here and what my audience loves to hear is the journey, right? We're all about how experts like you have created opportunities throughout their path. Like, so here you are, you have an unbelievably popular podcast and show and advanced human dynamics free course. You've got all this credibility, right? But you came from a very fascinating journey. I mean, you were kidnapped twice. The earliest public employment that I saw on your profile was back in 2001. You worked for Panama. You were an intern.
I worked for the State Department in Panama, not for Panama itself.
Yep. Pardon my miscommunication there.
No problem. Whatever. It makes sense. It might be confusing directly on there unless you just misspoke, in which case.
Yeah, no worries. So then you also you were a teacher of English as a second language in Serbia.
Yep.
You worked for Linklaters as an overpaid intern, which...
That's correct. Yeah. I was actually an attorney, but let's not split hairs. That's what you do. When you're an attorney, you're an overpaid intern, essentially.
So take me back to 2001. Maybe this wasn't even the start of your professional career, but this is the first thing listed that I found working for the embassy in Panama. What was that like?
Yeah, so this is right after September 11th. So I went down there early and they were like, sure, your security clearance should be done anytime. And then it wasn't done. And it wasn't done and it wasn't done. And all the other interns were cleared. And I was like, what is the holdup? And they were like, so you lived in Ukraine and Israel, but then there's this huge gap where you were just randomly in the Middle East. And then you were also an exchange student, but you weren't in regular Germany. You were in like the former eastern part of Germany. And then you studied Russian, but you also studied Hebrew for a little while, but you speak German. And then you learned Spanish a little bit, but you were in Mexico. Where exactly were you? What hotel were you at? No, I lived with people. I lived with families in all these countries. So you lived with a Ukrainian family. Well, they were Russian. Okay. We need all these addresses. And oh yeah, by the way, we have to have like FBI agents at the embassy in each of these countries, go and interview these families. And this might take a minute. So I was like, cool. How long could it possibly take? And then like months later, I'm still backpacking around Panama. And they're like, okay, you can come to work and do like public affairs because you are not cleared for anything. And then towards the end of the summer, I finally got a clearance. And what was really funny was it took so freaking long. And then finally I got a clearance. And then some people on, I'll just say the upper floors of the embassy where that things are sealed off nicely went, how did this guy end up with an internship? And how come he's starting in August? And they're like, oh, he took a long time to clear. And they're like, I'll say. So they started giving me some pretty interesting stuff. So it was really, really cool because I went from like, you're not allowed out of the lobby of this place to don't bring in any electronics and you can't have your own coffee mug and that kind of thing. So that was kind of a neat experience. I got a lot of experience or a little bit of experience watching the DEA operate, meeting with CIA guys, FBI. It was really a cool experience to have as a kid because I was probably like 21. And living in embassy housing in Panama was amazing because first of all, you live in not a compound, but in an embassy area. There's security everywhere. Everyone kind of knows who you are. You go to a bar or a club and it's like, oh, you guys are working at the embassy. Never wait in line, pay for a few things here and there, go to exclusive parties. It was cool. It was really cool. Being diplomat-ish is awesome. There's no getting around it. The problem is when you're a career diplomat, you've got all kinds of stuff you got to deal with because you work for the government. So you get married and then they're like, cool, your wife's going to be in South Korea and you're going to be in Zimbabwe. Like what? Oh, and also you're going to make low amounts of money forever. Okay. No thanks. So it's awesome when you're in your 20s. I would imagine as you get older, you're like, why did I pick this again?
At that point, did you know you wanted to be an attorney? Like, what was your vision?
No, I never wanted to be an attorney. Let's clarify that right now. I never wanted to be a lawyer. I went to law school for terrible reasons. First of all, I went there because people were like, you should be a lawyer. Law degrees are a great key to the future. Oh, you like to argue? You should be a lawyer. No, don't ever listen to anyone tell you should be a lawyer if they are not a lawyer. And if they are a lawyer, what you should do is say, why do you think I should be a lawyer? And if it doesn't sound like something that you are, don't listen to them unless they are very explicit about why. Because the problem is I listen to a bunch of people who are like, oh, you're studying political science? Oh, nobody's going to hire you for that. Oh, economics? I don't know what you can do with that. And this person was like a gym teacher. No offense to gym teachers, but you're really not qualified to tell people they should be lawyers based on you having watched Hill Street.
Unrelated, yeah.
Law and Order. It's just not true. So I was like, oh, okay. And then the other contributing factor was I went to the University of Michigan and I graduated and I tried to get jobs. And I was like, I don't know how to do this. Nobody really showed us how. Well, I'm going to stick around for a summer before I find a real job. I'll just work at Best Buy, which is like, I don't even know if that's still around. So I walk into Best Buy and I'm like, hi, I can build computers. I can install and uninstall software. I know how to install components. I know how to remove viruses. And they're like, cool. You have to sell CDs for 2 years before you can move up to computer repair. And I was like, 2 years? I built a computer on my own on the living room floor from components. What are you talking about? I have to sell CDs. I'm not selling Britney Spears CDs, dude. And they're like, well, this is where we need people. And I went, okay, adios. I'm not doing this. And so the answer back in 2002 or whatever to I can't get a job wasn't the market sucks. It wasn't maybe I should look different places. It wasn't, oh, gee, big companies aren't the only places that are hiring. The answer was I must just need more education. So I went to apply to different graduate schools and I got into a bunch and I got into some law schools and I got scholarships from law schools. And then I got into Michigan Law, which is a good law school, top 10. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that because it's part of the story here. And a bunch of people went, oh, if you got into a top 10 law school, you have to go. You're wasting an opportunity. It's like if somebody who hears you got into Harvard is like, you have to go. And you're like, but I hate Boston and I don't want to study this. And my family's in Mexico and I can't afford it. And they're like, but it's Harvard. It's like, okay, fine. So Michigan Law to lawyers was like, oh crap, I would have gone if I went in there. So you go and then you go, oh crap, well, I have so much debt. I have to take a Wall Street job or I'm never going to pay it off. So then you end up on Wall Street and you just go, what the hell just happened? Mm-hmm. How did I end up here? And unfortunately, what happens to most people, most of us attorneys, is we're unhappy in what we do because we ended up there thinking it was going to be something else, or we just took it because we thought, well, lucrative career. Then what happens is we go, well, I'm unhappy, but I can afford a boat and a boat would totally make me happy. So then you buy a boat. And then when you want to quit law, you go, I can't, I got all these freaking boat payments, man. And then I got a house. I can't quit. I can't take a lower paying job. Mm-hmm. I can't move into my own business. So what I did is I saved my money. And then also at the same time, the economy started to tank. And so I went, this is a great time to not get another job as a lawyer. I get a redo and I have dough. So I reinvested it in my company and I never looked back. But I think a lot of people are floating down the river, and as the river gets smoother and cushier and your raft becomes nicer and softer, you start to think, I could get used to this. And the problem is people do get used to it.
You said you reinvested into your company, your own company, or the company that you were working for in Wall Street?
My own company. I invested in my own company. So what happened is as the economy started to get crappier and crappier in 2008, what happened was I was saving my money. I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment. I had a bunch of people working with me on the podcast, and I was making about $160,000 a year plus bonus. So what they did is they said, look, you're not going to get a bonus. We're going to end up laying off everyone in about 9 months if the economy doesn't pick back up, which, as you know, spoiler alert, it didn't. So what we're going to do is pay you full salary and benefits. But what you should do is look for another job. You don't even have to come in because we don't have work for most of you. We'll call you if we get big projects, and then we'll have you come back. And if you have another job, we'll release you. But in the meantime, you're going to get full salary and benefits for the next 9 months. So basically, I was able to make, I don't know what it was, what it works out to, $16,000 or something like that per month. Plus I had health insurance and I didn't have to go to work, but I was allowed to use the office if I needed to. Nice. So I had a Wall Street office in the American Express building, or the same building as American Express, was making a ton of money, living like a college student and running my other company. So instead of going out and partying it up and enjoying it, I was like, cool, double down, take this money, use it as seed capital because it's already post-tax dough.
Right.
And that's what I did.
So when did the birth of the podcast happen? So in 2008, that's when this opportunity popped up. But when was the podcast officially started?
2006.
2006. Okay. So It had 2 years runway.
It was about a year. I mean, we started it, I think, in December.
Okay.
Or November or something like that. I think it was December 2006. So it was like a year and a few months at most of Runway. It wasn't quite 2 years.
But why a podcast? Like, where did that come from? I mean, you have no radio host experience as far as I know, right?
Right.
I mean,
no, I didn't. So what happened was, actually, when I was at the law firm, there was a partner there and he was never in the office. And I thought, okay, well, here's the problem. Let me back up. When I was in high school, I could kind of show up for a geometry test and sort of figure stuff out the night before or show up and take the test itself. And I was like, I'm so smart. Then I got to college and everybody was really smart. And I was like, oh, crap, I'm in trouble. So everyone was drinking their face off. And I went, oh, if I limit my partying to, I don't know, it's college, 3-4 nights a week, I can study and I'll actually be able to outwork all these other kids. So I outworked everyone. And then I got to Wall Street and it was like, oh, shoot, everyone's willing to work 6 days a week, 7 days a week. 16 hours a day. Everyone's smarter than me. I'm going to get fired. So I met up with this partner and I was like, hey, look, you're never in the office. You just work from home a lot. And what I was looking for was the secret key to working from home, because I figured if I worked from home, people wouldn't find out I didn't belong there and I wouldn't get fired. Classic imposter syndrome. So since I was looking for that, he goes, no, actually, it's not that I work from home a lot. It's that I bring in a lot of business. So I'm actually more valuable not in the office. I'm more valuable playing racquetball, going biking, doing jiu-jitsu, going to do some golf, going to charity stuff. I can outsource. I can delegate a lot of my work. I work from home. I keep up with my email. I keep up with the deal flow, but I'm really just bringing in clients. And I went, okay, hang on. My competitive advantage has always been be smart and or be able to outwork everyone. In law school, I studied for 16 hours a day instead of 5 or whatever most people were doing. But then when I got to Wall Street, I didn't have that option. There's only so many hours in the day. Making yourself smarter is really tough. So I was like, oh my God, I've got to learn how to bring in business. So I took Dale Carnegie classes. I took other ideas like that. And I started working on body language and nonverbal communication. I got a lot of coaching. I read a lot of books. I started going out and trying things because I'd read something online. It's like, if you look at someone in their right eye, they'll like you more. And I'd be like, oh, well, I can't just remember that. I got to do that. So I'd go out and I'd be like working on the right eye thing. And this is weird. Women I'm talking to are like, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm looking in your right eye. Do you feel an affinity for me? And they're like, no, you're being weird. Okay, check that off the list. I'm doing that too much. That either doesn't work or I'm doing it too much. So I worked on all these different skills and I found that a lot of the stuff you read online and a lot of the stuff that you do is just BS. So the stuff that I was working on and that was actually working for me, I started to teach to friends of mine. And then I'd go out 6 nights a week and my friends would come with me. And then we would meet some women and they'd be like, what are you guys doing? What are you guys working on? We see you here a lot. Like we heard some body language stuff. So we'd be breaking it down with them. And then the women would be like, wow, this is really cool. And then they would tell other guys and they would tell other women. So we would be having these conversations at bars or outside and people would go, so wait, catch me up. Nonverbal. And I go, I'm having the same conversation for the first 40 minutes of every night or the first 2 hours of every night. I need people to come in with a primer and then I can help them work on the advanced stuff. So I started burning CDs with conversations where I taught nonverbal communication, body language, stuff like that. And I kept giving them away. And then people would come back and go, yeah, I listened to that. Or I listened to half and then my brother took it and he's not giving it back. Or I gave it to my roommate, but do you have another thing? So I was giving out all these CDs and I was spending like hundreds of dollars in not a month, but over a period of a few months on blank CDs and burning them for hours during the day between classes. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And a friend of mine goes, there's this new thing called podcasting. You can upload an MP3 file to the internet and people can download them. And I went, oh, that's awesome. I need that. So we set up a WordPress website and people kept going, cool, this is really neat. And then another person's like, you can add it into iTunes. And if someone uses iTunes, they can download it. There was no such thing as a smartphone, or at least there was no iPhone. So there's no mobile podcasting, nothing like that. And then we would upload it to iTunes. And then suddenly it was like, wait a minute, this got 24 downloads yesterday. Who'd you tell about this? And then we were like, this is crazy. There's 800 people downloaded it last month. What's going on? And then we looked at the map and it was like, somebody from South Africa downloaded this. Do you know anyone from South Africa? No. So we started saying, hey, if you're listening to this and you're from South Africa, tell us how you found the show. And they're like, I'm in iTunes looking for stuff to listen to. And I found your show. And I was like, yeah, I guess we have a show. I was just thinking it's conversations, but really, I guess we do. We have a show. So I started treating it a little bit more like a show and putting more energy and effort into it. And then what started off as an easy way to distribute things to people that I knew and people that they knew, instead of burning CDs, turned into one of the most popular podcasts in the world.
That was fascinating. Quite literally, I love the fact that you actually had the balls to go speak to a partner and be like, yo, why aren't you at work? Like,
yeah, I instantly regretted it too. Now that you mention it, it's funny because what happened was he was supposed to be like my mentor, because other people had these mentors at the firm. And it's not like, oh, I like this guy, I'm going to show him how to do. No, it was like, okay, you're mentoring these three. So they would take you out for lobster for lunch. They'd take you to like see Blue Man Group, and it's ask me any questions. This guy was never around, and he wasn't rude or anything. He wasn't like a salty old fart or anything like that. But he was just kind of like, all right, I'll go and mentor this guy. So he took me out to Starbucks in the basement of this office building where we worked. Everyone else is getting $300 lunches, and I'm getting Starbucks while he's banging away on his BlackBerry. And he's like, so what's up? You got questions? And I was like, how come you're never in the office? And he puts his BlackBerry down. He's like, who said I'm never in the office? And I was like, crap. A lot of people that aren't me. And he was just like, wait, people are talking about me not being in the office. I was like, look, it's just something I've sort of noticed along with other people, because everyone's like, oh, how's your mentorship thing going? And I'm like, it's fine. Totally not dissatisfied at all, but you must be really busy. I assumed you were working from home. And he's like, no, I mean, I'm generating deals and da-da-da. Originally, I thought I'm going to get fired for saying this, but he was really cool. And that was the thing, is the reason he was so good at what he did, bringing in business and things like that, was he was really cool about all the stuff that he was doing. Like, everyone liked him. So the trick wasn't, well, you got to go and have a firm handshake and good eye contact. That's what the usual advice is. That wasn't the real deal. What his thing was, is he was fun and people liked being around him. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't about learning how to shove business cards in people's faces and be like salesy. It was about being likable enough where people go, hey, Jordan, I'm taking the afternoon off. Let's go for a bike ride down the West Side Highway. And you go, great. Yeah. I want to meet in like half an hour. I'm wrapping up an email. And then just bouncing and going and doing that, and having your bosses, which are the other partners at that point, go, look, when Dave leaves the office, it's because he's got something to do. It's not because he just doesn't want to be here anymore. Yeah. So nobody cares if you're the 32-year-old partner, younger than everybody else, or a 35-year-old partner, and you're taking off for a bike ride for the rest of the day, because they figure, yeah, he's going with the guys from Goldman Sachs. Mm-hmm. So don't bug him about it. Don't give him any crap about it. And at the end of the quarter, when he brings in 2 multi-million-dollar deals, you'll know why he went for a bike ride and why he didn't show up on Monday, because he was playing racquetball. That's his value to the firm. And what was interesting about that was when the firm eventually went under, he just got a job as a partner at another firm because he had this huge book of business. Yep. And a lot of the other partners were just SOL, right? Yep. They were just out of luck because they were workhorses and they were skilled, but there was a lack of need for skilled lawyers. There's always a need for more business.
So there's something really, really valuable about that lesson. And it's not being afraid to ask the tough questions, not even tough questions. You didn't know it was a tough question at the time, but like he never expected it. And I bet you probably without a shadow of a doubt, everybody else in your firm at your level was probably terrified to ask that question. And so it's kind of like that idea of if you don't know what to expect, you're in better hands than somebody who thinks and assumes what's going to happen after you do it.
Yeah, so that's true.
That led you down the whole path of personal development or nonverbal communication and Dale Carnegie and all that training, which led to your first podcast, which got some traction. People all around the world were listening to it. How did that then lead to the next big thing? And correct me if I'm wrong. I'm assuming the next thing was when you started working with Sirius, or you got your own show on Sirius. Like, what was that next big step after your firm went under and you were focusing on your podcast?
Yeah. So even before the firm went under, what happened was I had, of course, been doing some of the networking stuff as much as I could. And there was a friend of mine who had written a book, and he got a guest spot on a show on satellite radio, which is in New York. And that guest spot was for, at the time, it was Maxim Radio. And he was like, oh, they offered me my own show, but I don't want to drive. He was living in Virginia, and they're like, yeah, you just have to drive up here. And he's like, drive to Manhattan once a week to do a show? Like, ugh, no way. So he said, you should talk to my friend. He's really good on separate topics, but it might be really interesting for you. Just give him one guest slot. So he got us a guest slot on that particular show. And we went on there, and we happened to be going pretty well when the station manager walked in to do what's called an air check. And then the publicist was really interested. The show booker was really interested in what we were talking about. And they're like, this is so interesting. And then they said, we got to have you back sometime this is really good. What you're talking about, the verbal and nonverbal communication and the persuasion and the influence and all this stuff. And I said, cool, I'm always down for that. And then I went back again, crushed, in my opinion, the guest slot, which I thought was great because you can screw up radio and then it's over. It was live radio. And then I said, here's a card that I have about this show that I run. Check it out. And he went, all right, it's a podcast. You have heard of those. A couple weeks later, I said, hey, I'd love to come back on the show sometime. Also, did you have a chance to listen to this podcast? And they went, not only are you going to come back on the show, we've been listening to your podcast. It's really, really interesting. Would you consider doing something similar to this on satellite radio? And I said, sure. The only problem is I've got a day job as an attorney. So I can't really just like bust out and leave. And they said, what if we get you on the evening drive every Friday? And I said, I can do that. I can probably escape around 7 p.m. on a Friday. And if it's a really big deal that I'm working on, someone will cover for me. And I just have to walk 2 blocks because I was already working essentially right near it. I just have to walk a couple blocks and then go up and then I can zip right back. So I could even say, yeah, I've got something I got to do. And the rest of my guys in my law firm would kind of cover for me. And so the partners would have to know. So I'd go and I'd do the show. And after a while, we were working on Friday nights. And so I would come back and the guys had all tuned in online and listened to the whole show while they were working. So it was kind of funny. After a while, I didn't have to hide it. The partners are like, hey, isn't your show pretty soon? You got to go. And then I'd come back at 9 p.m. to finish up whatever deal we were doing or the work for the night for the next couple hours. And I'd come in and they were like, yeah, so that one caller, because the whole office was listening online. And so I ended up getting that satellite radio show, not only while I had the podcast, but while I was also an attorney. I was essentially just moonlighting. It was super fun.
That's so cool. So you had it was a weekly spot or a daily spot?
It was a weekly spot.
Weekly spot on Sirius XM I don't know if it was Sirius XM at the time, but
it was Sirius and then it became Sirius XM. Yeah.
Yeah. So clearly people were interested in nonverbal communication, which is fascinating to me because I feel like we have similar traits. I studied that stuff too. It's great stuff. I feel like most people are interested in it, but they're really not. Like when you go mainstream and you get your message out there, the audience is there. And it's extremely fascinating to hear about why people never heard of Dale Carnegie before, right? Why people never heard of body language and nonverbal communication. So you get your first gig on Sirius. How long did that last?
Oh, that was several years. Even after I had moved out to Los Angeles, I still ended up doing the Sirius XM at the time radio show from the studio weekly in LA for years and years after that. 3.5+ years, I think we did the show. Cool.
So did that for 3.5 years. Then eventually you launched another podcast, right? And that led to the Jordan Harbinger show. Right?
Correct. It was just sort of piggybacking one after the other after the other. It was just constantly going. It was like, oh, the Sirius XM show ends, but I'm still doing my show. So that's continually going.
So right now, obviously, the Jordan Harbinger show has massive success. I mean, I just checked out your ratings. They're like 1,400 positive reviews. I think it's like 4.5, if not 5 stars. It's a fascinating show. One last question before we wrap up. And it's going to tie to the idea of networking and everything that we talked about in the beginning, human dynamics, right? So as you start to build up this well of being generous, when did you launch the Jordan Harbinger show? It was 2018, right?
Yes, correct. February 2018.
Okay, so February 2018, and it's crushing it, right? So you've built up this thing like human equity, this social equity, human dynamic equity. I don't know what you want to call it, but you clearly had
social capital.
There you go. Social capital. Perfect. Sounds like you've used that before. And that sounds way better than what I was trying to say.
All good.
So social capital, and you launch your new show. How did you dip into that well? How did you start to cash in with that social capital? Because I'm assuming clearly you did because you're skyrocketing right now, but explain that before we wrap up, if you wouldn't mind.
So when I left my old company and I started the Jordan Harbinger show and Advanced Human Dynamics, I essentially had to start from scratch. I didn't get any company assets, IP, media, nothing from my old job, from my old company that I'd started and run for 11 years in the old show. And so all I had was talent, which is minimal in my case, /0, hard work ethic, which is great, but it only works if you're going to do everything yourself. And then I had my network, which was by far the most valuable lever, which is one of the reasons why we have the Advanced Human Dynamics Level 1 networking stuff, because that's been a huge game changer for me. at first when I was off on my own, it was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? It's going to be impossible. So I made a list of a couple dozen people that I could reach out to for help and that I knew would say yes. And I reached out to them. They said yes. I got some help. And then I went, okay, this is really working really well. I need to reach out to my entire network and ask everybody if I can get help or be helped by them when I'm in this time of need, essentially. And I reached out. I made a list of a lot of people. I reached out to everybody and I was like, hey, I'm going through this. Can you help me out? And a lot of the people, everybody was like, yeah, absolutely. Because I dug the well before I was thirsty. I'd made those relationships for the past 11 plus years. I'd given all the time without the expectation of anything in return. I wasn't what's in it for me ever. I was always just helping other people. And so as it turned out, people were kind of just jumping at the chance to reciprocate. And I ended up really, really starting off with a bang. The past 30 days, there's been 2.8 or 2.9 million downloads of the Jordan Harbinger show, which is pretty awesome. I don't know how else to phrase it. I wasn't expecting it to be that way. And over time, I mean, it's over 6.6 million downloads since February when we started in the middle of February. And a lot of our fans moved over from the old show. A lot of our guests I've had no problem booking. I've been able to call in some favors and get a lot of really great people lined up. I've just had no problem really restarting the business. My network gave me a contract right away because they knew what I was capable of. The team that I needed moved over from my old company and started working with me immediately. I mean, it was just really, really excellent and easier to make that transition than I thought. Don't get me wrong. It's still hard starting from scratch, but it's a lot easier when everything that you need and everybody that you need to help you is on board just by virtue of the fact that you were there for them at some point in the past that honestly, I barely even remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think what's very clear with your story is that, and I think what people are going to realize is like, when you build a network, your network is literally the most valuable asset, in my opinion, that you can ever build. Because no matter what happens, it's not like, okay, you transition to companies. No matter what happened in your life, provided that you're still alive to cash in on this, no matter what happened, you could rely on that network to help you out with where you are, right? For some reason, maybe you had to move across the country for whatever, move across the world. Like you can still cash in on that network for some sort of help. And that's why I love building that network. You absolutely have to build it, and it applies to everybody. Like it is very mass marketable, meaning like everybody needs to build a very, very strong network and develop that social capital. Love it, man. Well, Jordan, I had a blast. I mean, we talked about a ton of stuff. You've got your networking course at advancedhumandynamics.com/level1. We talked about your journey from when you started out as an intern at the embassy in Panama to then being convinced to go to a top 10 law school at Michigan. And then obviously going on to grad school, going into more debt, which led to you taking a job on Wall Street. But all of it was part of this tremendous learning experience, which led you to then asking your mentor why the heck he wasn't showing up to work.
Yeah.
Probably one of the greatest stories ever, because that led you down this valuable exercise of, oh, I need to be valuable. Like I'm not tied to dollars per hour output. Like if I produce a result, people will value me. And then you learned all about nonverbal communication, which led to CDs and a podcast, and ultimately multiple shows on big networks. And now you've got a podcast, a show that is 6 million downloads, 3 million this month or in the last 30 days. So did I leave anything out? Did we miss anything that you wanted to include?
No, man. I just love it if people who are listening to this would check out the Jordan Harbinger show. There's a lot of useful tips in there for everything. Every episode is practical. We make worksheets for every episode. The idea is that you learn something. And so I hope I've helped explain and convey that today. And I would love to see some of your fans become fans of the Jordan Harbinger show as well.
Awesome. Go check it out. Everyone who's listening right now, he's an amazing guy, an excellent interviewer, and I can't speak highly of him enough. So Jordan, appreciate you, man. And for everyone else listening right now, go check him out, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we look forward to giving you the next one. Now, if you want additional trainings and content outside of the podcast, I release exclusive video trainings on my Experts Unleashed YouTube channel. And if you'd like to come hang out with thousands of other fellow experts, join our Facebook group community where we do hangouts and webinars to help support you in your journey. Finally, if you'd like my personal help to develop, launch, or scale your business, contact me directly for private consulting opportunities to see if any spots are available. And you can find all of the information above at expertsunleashed.com.